The story's protagonist is a small child with a damaged face and an irrepressible spirit. This character is known to the great majority of people. This kid is reared by a motorcycle mom who loves being different. This story is a fantastic example of how a film can tell a story and reach its full potential. By the time the 1985 movie Mask, starring Cher and Eric Stoltz, was released to the broader public, it was already a cultural icon. From the moment it was released to the moment it was released, it was a hymn to love and acceptance in the face of huge agony that brought tears to the listener's eyes. It's a nice story, but it doesn't explain all that happened afterwards. Florence Rusty Tullis, the real mother of Rocky Dennis, gave her opinions about the movie, her son, and the life they really shared until her own life was sadly cut short. She spoke, too, about the life they had led together. She also talked about the life that they had went through together. What she revealed was not the glossy Hollywood story of heroism, but something far more complicated, tough, and unpolished than what was known before. It is a fact that recontextualizes the mythology, revealing the deep darkness that the cinema industry has left out of the story. To really appreciate the story that Rusty felt he had to set right, we need to go back to the moment in time before the movie cameras even started to film. Roy Lee, Rocky Dennis, was born on December 4th, 1961, in Glendora, California, in the school year 1961. He was born in the state of California. Her second husband was Roy Dennis, whose parents were Rusty Dennis. His father was Rusty Dennis. Roy Dennis was his father's name. When he was a tiny child, he was called by his nickname because he would not fall asleep unless he was rocked to sleep. That was why he had his moniker. It was for this reason that he was christened with this unique moniker. During the first couple of years of his life, he suffered from nothing more than the regular diseases that are involved with being a youngster. Some of these problems included frequent infections of the sinus and ears. These were annoying, but nothing to be concerned about. Rocky was 2 years old, and as a routine thing, they had a tonsillectomy, when the defining moment, the incident that cleaved their life into a clear before and after, took place. This incident split their life into an unambiguous before and after. This event was not the one that determined the direction of their lives. The X-ray technologist who was preparing for the therapy was surprised to see the structure of the boy's skull not what it should be. That was a great find. The unrelated discovery led to a series of medical tests, all done due to the discovery. Right after that, Rusty had a tough year that had a lot of uncertainty. In this time, she accompanied her tiny daughter numerous times a week to the UCLA Medical Center for a seemingly endless array of medical examinations. When the dust settled, it turned out that the correct diagnosis was craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. The remarks were a thunderclap in the medical world, describing a condition so vanishingly unusual that experts told Rusty at the time that 6 such cases had ever been documented in the history of medicine. It should also be noted that the disease was so rare that it was deemed a medical phenomena. Over the years, the illness creates an abnormal development of calcium deposits in the skull, eventually resulting in a chronic, progressive hardening of the bones. This disease leads to the production of calcium deposits. This is the outcome of sickness. This progression will eventually lead to the person's loss of eyesight, hearing, and neurological function. Furthermore, the facial features will be deformed due to this growth, and the brain will be squashed. The prognosis, pronounced with grim finality, was that Rocky would not live to reach his 7th birthday, and that he would most certainly suffer severe intellectual deficits and blindness. Rocky's diagnosis said he wouldn't make it to his 7th birthday. Such a prognosis would place an impassable barrier of grief before the great majority of parents that they would have to cross to reach their goals. Rusty Dennis, however, was not the kind of father even to be termed typical. It was not that she had fainted away. It was that the medical community had already reached the decision that her kid should be put to death. Instead, a rebellious mentality, acquired from a life of struggle and nonconformity, took charge of the situation. She was not ready to accept the prognosis of the physicians, and after an examination of the case, and considering the negative outlook of the physicians, she decided she would prove the physicians' prophecies wrong. This refusal to accept the verdict that the world had handed down on her son became the core of her being, and the philosophy that would save him, and in some ways haunt their story to the very end. In the end, she was able to save him. In the end, she'd succeeded in keeping him alive. Her attitude to parenting was a mirror of her own philosophy of life. Rusty's way of being a mom was an exact mirror of her life's philosophy. Florence Steinberg was born May 29, 1936, in Brooklyn, New York, United States of America. Her childhood in the suburbs of California was quite different from the world she was from, which was very different from the world she was from. She was reared in an environment where it was all about the fact that her father was a truck driver. She began to behave disrespectfully at a young age. She had skipped school 13 times altogether, and as a result, was booted out of junior high school. That was the reason for her expulsion. By the time she was 14 years old, she had already began smoking marijuana and was already involved with motorcycle gangs. Other than that, she got into taking marijuana. She decided to leave school at the age of 15 in order to try for a job as a hoochie coochie dancer at Coney Island. She did so in order to have a career in the field. At just 17 years old, she not only gave birth to her first kid, Joshua, but also married her first husband, a truck driver named Tommy Mason. At the same time, she gave birth to her first kid. Then that marriage ended, and she married Roy Dennis and moved to California, where Rocky was born. Rocky was born in California. Her life was a tapestry of adversity, self-reliance, and a deep-seated distrust of authority. Her life was a tangled tapestry of experience. This past was a big influence on her reaction to Rocky's condition, and an important factor in the whole affair. In her lifetime, she had come to the deep conviction, while not based on scientific data, that a person might have perfect control over his own health by the use of his own willpower. This had been an inspiration to her all her life. It dawned on her that if a person could make themselves sick by worrying, then they could make themselves healthy by believing for themselves. This conclusion came to her as she began to think about it. This is the conclusion she reached. More specifically, it was she who taught Rocky the particular worldview that he grew to believe in. When he had a blinding headache, a common symptom of his illness, Mom would send him to his room with the command, "Make yourself well." Through this philosophy of radical empowerment, he was taught that he was not a helpless victim of his sickness, but an active agent in his own life. No doubt this style of thinking is what made a lot of individuals grow to admire the outstanding spirit over the years. Their quarrel spilled over beyond the bounds of their home. Covina and Glendora school districts were pushing Rocky into special education programs, but she resisted them with everything she had. In her statement, she claimed that he had a healthy capability for cognition and that he should be in an environment that was more reflective of the overall population. What she was saying was that the hesitation was not a reflection of Rocky's ability, but rather it was a reflection of the uneasiness that the other parents were feeling at the same time. She felt this was the main thing that caused her to make the decision she did. The medical doctors told her that his eyesight was so terrible that he would never be able to learn how to read, and this was the explanation she received. Her acts were directly contrary to theirs, but Rocky became, by all measures, an honor student and a popular guy among his peers because of his steadfast commitment to her beliefs. This was the reason why he could be so successful. During her journey to the Center for Genetic Research at UCLA, playwright Anna Hamilton Phelan got the great chance to meet Rocky for the first time. It was on this occasion that she was able to impress Rocky by virtue of the extraordinarily courteous and amusing way in which he carried himself. Later, Phelan would say that Rusty was not a typical mother, but was just the mother Rocky needed. Rusty was an established member of the motorcycle gang known as the Turks, which was the basis of their universe throughout their lifetime. This was the family they had built within themselves, and they had built it. These people, as opposed to weekend hobbyists who just wanted to participate in activities connected with their hobbies, were part of a tribe that lived a hard-living lifestyle and were bound together by their own rules of everything. These were the people who were his guardians and uncles his life. From when he was a child, there were no doubts about their love for him, as they saw through his exterior to the humorous and clever young man he was inside. They didn't think about the fact that they loved him. The character Sam Elliott plays in the film Gar was named after a real person, Bernie Tullis. This person was the model for the part. Bernie Tullis was a father figure for Rocky. Rusty had a male friend, a chap named Bernie Tullis. But Rocky's support system was a community that took in the kid and his mom when the rest of the world might have turned their backs. Rocky had the support and encouragement of the group. This motorcyclist circle was not only a piece of cinematic window dressing, but the basis of Rocky's support system. She was very upfront about her drug usage, and it was another part of her life that was depicted in a way that was more palatable for more mainstream people in the movie. In interviews, she denied allegations that she utilized narcotics to cope with the pressures of being Rocky's mom. That was the accusation in the film. She was very open in stating that she was a regular partygoer and that she used drugs as an essential element of the lifestyle she advertised by going to parties. She also said she used drugs. The statement was not a plea for help. It was a proclamation of truth about who she was and the environment that she had lived in all of her life. The manner she separated herself was an evidence of her willingness to take entire responsibility of every facet of her personality, regardless of how negative it may look to other people. It was a testament to her dedication that she placed a high value on this distinction, which she thought to be of importance. It was a movie office hit when it was first released in 1985, and has grossed over $48 million since its initial release. Mask was a great hit. Rusty Dennis was to get $15,000 for the rights to her and her son's life story, who was dead. This is the deal that was struck. The fact was far greater than they had imagined, while many individuals thought the sum so small as to be almost an insult. Most of that money, according to some sources, was spent to pay directly for the ever-increasing medical expenses of her older son, Joshua, who was battling AIDS at the time. Joshua was being treated for the condition at the time. At that time, Joshua was a patient. Rocky's story was not bought to make money, but to find a way to save the life of her other child. She did this in an effort to discover a solution to save her other child from dying. When they got there, members of the press were expecting to find a happy mother basking in the glow of Hollywood's recognition. But they got Rusty's reaction instead, which was very sincere, just what they needed. She famously described the film as a fairy tale. I always thought that showing Rocky's courage would help a lot of disabled kids and the parents of disabled kids. I didn't realize that the movie would be about me as well, she said in a 1986 profile in the Chicago Tribune. It makes me feel like some kind of heroic person, the fact that Cher is so intelligent. It was true that the movie was going to be about me, too. She was a big Cher fan and thought the actress did a wonderful job of capturing her essence with her performance. At one point, she stated, "I always thought I was perfectly normal, that the rest of the world is nuts." However, the main subject of the film made her uncomfortable while watching it. The movie she was going to get was meant to be about the complicated life she had, but she was given a movie that was supposed to be about the spirit of her kid. Her comments were more in-depth than what had been provided before. She commented that over the course of the movie, more than 10 years of their lives were compressed into what felt like 1 year. This was something she stated as the movie was going on. Even more upsetting was that the circumstances made it utterly impossible that her firstborn son Joshua could be alive. One son was remembered, while the other son was perceived as invisible, and this was one of the factors that contributed to how much sadness was suffered. To make matters worse, there was also the problem of the music that had to be sorted out. Rocky was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and Peter Bogdanovich, who also directed the film, was the original one that wrote the score for the movie. Rocky was a genuine Springsteen fan. Using Springsteen's songs, Bogdanovich blended them into the piece. Rusty was enraged when Universal Pictures was unable to secure the rights to Bob Seger's music for the soundtrack. Also, Universal Pictures was unable to obtain the rights to use Bob Seger's song. She was on TV, and her critique was direct and blistering. At the same moment she was giving it, "I don't think even knew who Bob Seger was," she said. Bogdanovich was so insulted by this that he decided to sue the company. A huge amount of time after the theatrical version had already been devoured by everyone across the world, Springsteen's songs were ultimately reinstated for a director's cut in the year 2004. This happened, and this was because of the fact, on the flip side, the most shocking discoveries were those Rusty made about Rocky's last moments. These were the most amazing. By the time he was 16, in the fall of 1978, his condition had deteriorated to the point where it was no longer bearable. He decided to stop taking his medication. It felt like forever before the disease that was expected to kill him 10 years ago started making itself known in his body. It had been so long, it seemed like eternity. The headaches were a continual source of misery for him, a severe one, besides the fact that he was in a wheelchair. He could not perform his function without them. Long after a long day, Rocky came home on October 3rd, 1978, with another bad headache. He made this statement after returning after a supper out with his family and their acquaintances active in the motorcycling scene. Rusty did what she had done before, and she had done likewise. She told him to look for himself without any help, and sent him back to his room while she continued to give him instructions. He died peacefully, in his sleep, in the night. But the prediction had been he would live almost 10 years less than he should. It was thought he would live almost 10 years more than he should. The movie shows the heart-wrenching scene as Rusty finds the body of her child. This sequence shows what a calamity has happened. You think about how bad it is, and it breaks your heart. But it turned out to be something quite different. Rocky died when Rusty was in her lawyer's office, defending herself against a charge of possession of narcotics. Rocky had been caught with drugs on him. Rocky had been unwell in the period preceding up to her death. Bernie was with her, and he was the one who had called to tell her the news. This specific aspect does not necessarily put in question her position as a mother, but rather it puts light on the gap that exists between the lovely film plot and the muddy and twisted reality of their existence. The fact that it highlights the gap underscores the fact that this gap is highlighted. That same night, her parenting philosophy, the very thing that had given Rocky the strength to think of himself as a whole individual, was put to the ultimate test. It left Rocky with the ability to see himself as a whole individual. Her parenting had allowed Rocky to see himself as a whole person. She never apologized for the words she had spoken to him in his last moments, but she was certain to the very end that her way had given him the marvelous gift of a life lived without the presence of death. To fully grasp Rusty's story, it's important to recognize the significance of Joshua Mason, the son that Hollywood left out of the storyline. Otherwise, you could not have the full understanding of the story. His absence in the film caused a major gap in the course of the family's history at that point in time. And then, just a year after the movie Mask took his family's tale to the public, Joshua was diagnosed with Kaposi's sarcoma in 1986. His family's story became known to the globe through the movie. In that time period, the phrase AIDS crisis was often used to refer to Kaposi's sarcoma. He was a writer who genuinely lived in San Francisco, but he was honest about his sexual orientation. In answering a question concerning his mother's attitude towards his being gay, he said she was tolerant of his sexuality. When he left in 1987, he was 32 years old. It was here, at this moment in time, when both of Rusty's sons had passed on with their respective deaths. Joshua does not believe in mortality, she told the Chicago Tribune in defiance of his sickness. And I don't either, she said of herself. It was a tragic twist of the theme she used to rear Rocky. The fact that she sold the story of one of her sons in a desperate attempt to save the other boy, but failed, adds an almost intolerable depth of sadness to her life. The day Rocky died, Rusty moved to San Francisco and became a Buddhist, working as a counselor for drug addicts wanting to work with dying patients at the Shanti Project, where she could try to convert her long experience with grief into helping others. The disorder that had defined her for so long was gradually shifting into a quieter role. But she was still herself, riding motorcycles, a symbol of the independence and rebellion she loved. On October 14th, 2006, that sign was the cause of her premature death. She was riding her motorcycle with 3 wheels when she experienced a tire blowout, which caused her to lose control of the motorcycle and cause it to collide with a telephone pole. She had reached the age of 70. She survived the accident, despite the fact that she had fractured legs and a lung that had been punctured. Nevertheless, an infection proved to be too much for even her unyielding willpower to conquer entirely. Rusty Tullis, also known as Florence, passed away on November 11th, 2006. The question, "Why me?" was never posed by them. Her request for Joshua was never made. Even not for her own benefit. Her explanation for Rocky's passing was that he was simply another place to go, and that he enjoyed traveling to other locations. Earlier, she had stated this. Rocky Dennis and Rusty Dennis left behind a legacy that is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. This legacy is a monument to the beauty and horrible intricacy of human life. This legacy does not have any of the gloss and glamour that Hollywood has traditionally associated with it. Rocky was a young kid who, according to all of the legal criteria, should have been devastated by his condition. Rocky's condition was terrible. Rocky was in a difficult situation as a consequence of his illness. As opposed to that, he developed into a young man who fell in love, became a friend, became a mentor, and eventually became a student who obtained great marks. In response to the idea of undergoing physical surgery in order to restore his appearance to its prior state, he posed the question, "Who will I see in the mirror if I change my face? Who will I see if I change my face?" It was entirely up to him to make the choice. His mother was a go-go dancing biker from Brooklyn who was a problematic, fierce, drug-using, and law-breaking individual when he was growing up. She was also a member of the criminal underworld. She gave up everything for her child and made sure that he had a family who loved him unconditionally and without any strings attached to it. It was a promise that she made to him that he would not die in a medical facility surrounded by machines. And she kept her word. He did not die in a medical facility. The true story of Rocky and Rusty Dennis does not offer a straightforward redemption or a perfect representation of the compassion that parents can show to their children. Rocky and Rusty Dennis were a couple who had a difficult relationship. The unfiltered truth of a life that was lived according to its own terms. Terms that were defiant, horrible, and unforgettable is provided by it. This is something that is much more significant and genuine than anything else.